Okay, welcome to the May 19th meeting of the Citizen Oversight Board. Excited to have everybody here. We will begin our meeting by just approving minutes from the, sorry, I'm just going back to my agenda, from the May 5th meeting. And I was not there, so I cannot vote, but if we can have approval on that.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
Great. Any all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, the motion passes. Thank you. Was hoping to welcome our newest
She's
member.
here.
Oh, there she is. Great. Good timing. Hello, Larry. Hello, David. Hello, Tymisha. Welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to welcome our newest board member, Tymisha Watkins, who actually joins us from the nominating committee. And so as we wound that down, we were able to get one of those committee members over onto the COB itself, and really excited to have you and your expertise join us. Do you want to say anything about yourself and your interest in the board as by means of introduction?
I'm trying to stay off of being unmuted. I am a native, so I was born and raised in Denver. I went to college and everything else that in Denver. I am a pilot by training, but I am a software engineer. And I've been working with the aviation industry, defense for the bulk of my career. So I'm very interested in the direction that Denver goes. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the board. I know you and I were starting to trade emails about trying to get together, but any other board members who are excited about our newest member, please feel free to reach out and extend a warm welcome. With that, a couple more announcements. So the first is that board leadership elections are coming up. And unlike the mayoral race, I expect fewer candidates for all positions, but welcome anyone who would like to run. So you just let me or Daniel know if you're interested in either the chair or vice chair. Happy to cede the seat to anybody who wants it. And Nick, maybe you feel the same. So, you know, enthusiasm is really all you need, and you're welcome to that. So just let us know, and otherwise we'll do our elections during the July 7th meeting. Larry, I know you have some information that you would like to share. Are you ready to do that now?
Sure.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. I am fortunate enough to have been granted a sabbatical, so I'm going to be on sabbatical from my day job here at the parish, and also requesting that from the boards that I serve on, as most of the time will be spent out of the country, going to Belize to go spend time with family. So I will be out on sabbatical from June 2nd is my last day in the office, and coming back on October 9th.
Wow.
So yeah, so asking to have my time with the COB board pause during that time, but definitely want to continue if that's okay.
So Daniel and I felt like that wouldn't be an issue, but if other board members feel concerned about Larry taking a sabbatical and rejoining us, just let me know, and we can work through that. I think it's great, and I just want to say congratulations, Larry. What an awesome opportunity, and certainly a reward for your work is the opportunity to take some rest and reflection. So that's super awesome, and really excited for you there. Okay, last thing is that Daniel has provided a doodle to the board members with a bunch of different events, with visits to the jail, and a couple of other, date scheduling things. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out, that will help us get some things on the calendar. Daniel, anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, just their windows of opportunity to do a variety of different things, whether that's arranging a visit to one of the jails, whether it's visiting the 911 call center or some other city facility. There was interest from the board, so trying to get a couple of slots where more folks are available. And I will be, we'll talk about it later as well, but there could be another doodle coming. I've done all the background work necessary to rent a space at the Juneteenth Music Festival. So if the board is ready to commit to that, it's noon to 8 p.m. on the 17th and 18th of June. I can send out a doodle to do more specific scheduling for those 2 dates as well.
What date did you send the email out for the doodle for the visits to the jail?
I'll resend it, so it's at the top of the
Yeah, I can't. I'm looking for that now. Okay. I mean, I saw there was an outreach update, but it didn't have a doodle attached to it. Okay. Anyway, yeah, please resend it. Thanks.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for filling that out. Just one personal note from me. We are adopting a baby in August. And I'm really excited to extend my family. The baby is due August 1st and we have a board meeting August 4th. I do not plan to attend that meeting. I will be too tired to put my face on camera. So just asking folks for a little bit of grace during that period, as it's a totally unique adventure for our family, and we're really excited about that. And just thanks to everyone who covered the past couple of weeks in lead up to the baby. We're trying to do everything out of the house we can for the dark times of unending sleep cycles. So thanks for that. Appreciate your patience. Okay, so let's get into the meat of our agenda and welcome today's guest, Sheriff Diggins. Sheriff, I know Siri's thinking I'm saying Siri. I know we provided you with a bunch of questions, so if you want to work through those, and then we'll get to questions from board members.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, board. It's good to see all of you. Before I begin, let me start by thanking the men and women of the Denver Sheriff's Department for the service that they provide to the citizens of the city and county of Denver every single day, 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They are heroes. And this being National Law Enforcement Appreciation Week, we appreciate the members of the community that reach out to us and support us every day as well. And we've done lots this week to show our staff how much we appreciate them as well. I'll jump right into the questions. The first question that was sent to me, and I'll just read through them and respond to each. In March, the COB issued its 2022 annual report, which included recommendations for the Denver Sheriff's Department. Could you please respond to those recommendations? DSD is specifically mentioned in 3, 4, 6, as well as indirectly in number 7. I will read the majority of those, but some of them I will read parts. Number 3, DSD staff. The DSD should continue to make every effort to increase recruitment and retention rates among both uniformed and civilian personnel. City agencies should seek out ways to partner with the DSD in promoting their recruitment efforts. The DSD should continue to make every effort to appropriately compensate staff for the important work they do. The DSD should continue to improve non-financial retention factors such as workplace culture and employee wellness programs. So for the first recommendation, we have partnered with a number of city agencies to promote their recruitment efforts for the DSD. We have guidance and partnership with the Department of Safety. Executive Director of Safety Armando Soldalte, in fact, has made it one of his priorities to help the Denver Sheriff's Department, and their entire HR team has left no stone unturned when it comes to helping our recruitment unit do that. Every job fair, every career fair, every festival that you could name, including Juneteenth, you'll see us there. Everywhere that you could think of where we could be recruiting, we are, and we have them as a partner, and we're also aligned with working side by side with the Denver Police Department recruitment unit, as well as the Denver Fire Department recruitment unit in those efforts. We have lots of things to do when it comes to that, and we'll continue to do so until we get through the staffing crisis. We don't give up hope and know that at some point we'll be in a much better space. The DSD should continue to make every effort to appropriately compensate staff for the important work they do. We absolutely agree with that. For our civilian staff, which we refer to as professional members, we make sure that we submit requests when they ask about their salaries to ensure those are moved on to HR for a compensation analysis. Those are done quite frequently, and we believe that that helps us to make sure that they know that we value the work that they do. For the uniform ranks for the deputy sheriffs that are part of the collective bargaining agreement, we have made that a priority for us. As many of you know, through the past collective bargaining session, we made a lot of gains when it came to retention efforts. We continue to have those conversations with the current administration, and going into the next administration, we will continue to have those discussions. And the DSD should continue to improve non-financial retention factors such as workplace culture and employee wellness programs. We have a very robust employee wellness program. We have physical therapists that are a part of our department. We have wellness coordinators that go out and work with our staff for physical fitness, for mental health, for financial awareness and the like. And we have not just during Employee Appreciation Week, times when we do special things for staff. We're doing that every single month. We're constantly working on that. We have food trucks that come to our facilities. This past week, we had lots of business partners that donated items to the Denver Sheriff's Department for Law Enforcement Appreciation Week. We're always trying to figure out ways to let our staff know how important they are to us. And we have meetings with our employee groups to listen to them, to make sure that they have an opportunity to talk to us and to bring challenges to us to ensure that the culture is welcoming and inviting for all members, uniform and professional as well. So I'll pause there, Madam Chair, and answer any questions.
Questions on that from the board?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Good morning, Sheriff.
Good morning.
With respect to the first part of your answer, how are your recruitment efforts going so far this year?
Well, as you know, the past couple of years has been tough for law enforcement. Across the nation, from border to border and coast to coast, agencies have seen a lack of folks who want to put on uniforms. That is beginning to change. I think the pendulum is swinging a little bit slower for the Denver Sheriff's Department. We know that if we continue to do the things that we're doing, which is changing the internal culture, which has become very positive, making sure our staff knows how important they are to us, they will help us in that recruitment. And we're gonna continue to do so and make sure that we fill our ranks. So I would say that the pendulum is starting to move. We're making some changes, positive changes to the process of how we're onboarding people, and hopefully they will be fruitful for us.
Have you found that the fact that the jurisdiction essentially of the Sheriff's Department is overseeing the jail population, that's a deterrent, that you have people who are interested in the job but would like to have sort of a broader scope of responsibilities?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a deterrent. I do think that if we're able to provide more opportunities for people to do things in the Denver Sheriff's Department, that will help us, especially with the newer generation that wants to have some additional things to do when they wear this uniform. So we are working towards that. We're in partnership with the Department of Safety as well as the mayor's office to talk about how does that look for the law enforcement agencies that work in Denver, both the Denver Police Department and the Denver Sheriff's Department, to be in partnership with those law enforcement duties and the expansion of that. So we absolutely understand that that could be a great recruitment tool for us, and look forward to hopefully moving our agency forward. And I think Anna had her hand up, and then Julia.
That's good.
And I'm sorry, Stefan, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you, Sheriff.
Good morning, Sheriff Diggins.
Good morning.
Hi, so you had mentioned the staffing crisis that we are still going through. And I was just wondering, within this staffing crisis with the department, is it creating a difficult culture, a work environment for the people that are employed with the Sheriff's Department, being overworked, tired? I don't know if maybe they could be upset with their compensation due to the amount of hours and dedication that they are involved with in the Denver Sheriff's Department, but is it affecting the overall culture, I guess, with the lack of staff?
Our deputies are tired. They're exhausted. It is tough work. It's tough work to begin with, wearing the uniform, having a staffing shortage exacerbates that. They work lots of overtime. But what I can tell you is Denver deputies are dedicated to the people that they serve, the people that they work next to, and we continue to press on. And I think that is the resiliency that has kept our department moving forward since December 2nd of 1902 when we were founded. So I would say yes, the answer to your question is they're tired, and we're looking forward to the days when we have enough staff so that overtime is not as abundant as it is today. This time is very similar to when I came on 29 years ago. Back then, there were very large classes which were hired on. I had approximately 50 people that were in my academy class, and before our class, there were 3 classes before that that had the same number. So there was a big hiring of deputy sheriffs back then because of the staffing shortages. So we're looking forward to the ability for us to be able to do the same thing, to bring on large classes to help us through the staffing crisis. But we're a resilient agency, and so is our staff.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned that you feel like the culture is improving. And can you say a little bit more about sort of what are your indicators of that? And you know, I know you've put in a lot of work to try and do that. So just how do you know that that's working?
You know, I'm the type of leader who believes in management by walking around. And when I walk around and I talk to the deputies that are working, the professional members that are working, even though they're working lots of hours, even though some of them are tired, their attitudes are positive about our department. When you see the employee appreciation events like we had this week, there was a lot of camaraderie amongst our staff. We have great rank and file staff, great leaders in our agency, and in talking to them, I think they still believe in the Denver Sheriff's Department and the hope in who we are and what we're looking forward to become. So I think that's what, in my opinion, gives me the indication that the culture is improving and that things are getting better.
Thanks. Any other board questions on this topic?
And I'll move on to the next question. Number 4, oversight of medical staff. The DSD should ensure that they exercise sufficient oversight over the performance of Denver Health staff and the process by which complaints related to medical staff and services are handled. As I shared before, we have in this contract period through the operating agreement with Denver Health and Hospital inserted a section in both A6 and B3 that gives us the authority to bring on a person who is a member of the Denver Sheriff's Department, specifically designated to work with Denver Health. And in fact, that section of A6 and B3 reads that the sheriff may designate an administrator to serve as the official city representative for those sections. Communication between the city and the authority shall be directed through that city administrator. They will also have, the authority has to identify a person who will serve as the liaison between that administrator and the Denver Health system to work collaboratively to ensure that the contract requirements are met. We are in the process of that. I received approval through the Budget and Management Office to get that position moving forward. So I have been working directly with the Department of Safety Finance team as well as HR to hire that person on. They should be on board within the next 2 months. We've already written the requirements for what that position is and the type of person that we're looking for. So we look forward to that posting going out in the next couple of weeks, having interviews and bringing that person on board to help us to manage that process a little more closely. So I'll pause there for questions now. Madam Chair.
Yeah, thanks. Once you've got that person on board and they're sort of in their role, be excited to kind of hear from you, how that administration is working and, again, sort of what metrics that person is using to understand, how well, that subcontractor is working against that contract. I think you're well aware that one of our, emerging concerns is just sort of the transparency into the services provided there and just the difference in dealing with inmate complaints around health matters versus, services provided directly by the sheriff's office. And so, I think we'll just be really excited to engage with that person and sort of get increased transparency into that set of processes through that role.
Agreed, ma'am. And when that person comes on board in my next quarterly meeting, hopefully they'll be on by that time. I'll be more than happy to bring them here to introduce them to you. And we are as equally as excited to be able to have a person to fill this role. It's something that the Department of Safety supports and the current mayor and the administration supports. So we look forward to having the ability to have someone with medical expertise help us to keep that contract on track. All right, I'll move on to the next question or the next recommendation, which I'm sorry, Terrence.
Man, I thought you were gonna forget all about me, Sheriff Diggins.
You're unforgettable, Terrence.
Yeah, I wish that was true. So I think it's a good step forward with the contractor. I think it's very positive, and as you are well aware, I am always concerned about the care and how we make sure that inmates, or I don't know what the PC term is, but inmates, residents of your facilities get proper medical care, because we actually control their lives when they're there. My question, and I don't know if it's a question or a comment, what else can we possibly do to ensure that there's transparency beyond the contractor and that we have some insight into making sure that Denver Health provides proper medical care? I know we can't, that it's financially probably not feasible to bring any of that in-house, but how can we gain some leverage? Or do you have any ideas of how we can gain leverage over Denver Health? And I'm speaking, and I don't mean leverage in a negative way, but it's, it's the lawyer in me, I guess, where I'm like, how do we get leverage in that relationship so that we can ensure that the proper things are done for those people who are in the care of the Denver Sheriff's Department while they're incarcerated?
I think perhaps making a recommendation for public dashboards that Denver Health would be willing to stand up relative to the care that they provide could be one way. I'm sure that that's something that the Department of Safety and the administration would be open to discussing with them. In the work that we do, we work very closely with them. In my opinion, the fact that they're accredited by the National Commission on Correctional Healthcare means a lot to us. That's the national best practice standard for healthcare in facilities of our nature. And I think perhaps them sharing more information about the work that they do with the public would be helpful, so that folks do understand the great, or I should say, the good care that is provided by them every single day. We book 20,000 people through our system every single year, and healthcare is provided for each of those folks, in sharing the information and how they are providing that care and letting the community know would help folks to have a little more assurance that they're doing that.
Thank you. I hope we can get a dashboard together. That sounds like a brilliant idea.
Me too. I'm looking forward to that.
I mean,
All right.
dashboard by idea is much better than your barbecuing.
We had to go there.
I
Every
know.
meeting,
Other
every
board
meeting we had to go there.
questions, other board questions on this topic. Moving us right along. Okay, go ahead, Sheriff.
All right, number 6, information sharing. Oversight entities cannot effectively build trust between the community and law enforcement if the community does not believe that the oversight bodies have consistent and unfettered access to all relevant information. To that end, the Department of Safety, the Denver Police Department, and Denver Sheriff's Department should view the following recommendations as a starting point towards enhancing community trust through transparency. And that the rest of that recommendation is on page 27 of the COB's 2022 annual report. I know that the Department of Safety, the Denver Police Department, and the Denver Sheriff's Department are all in favor of transparency. In fact, I know that Chief Ron Thomas has worked very hard to increase and improve the transparency of the Denver Police Department, as has the Department of Safety under Director Soldalte's leadership done the same. The Denver Sheriff's Department has a number of dashboards which are available to the public. We work hand in hand with the monitor's office. I'm sure both Liz and Greg, who are on this call, can tell you that anytime they call me, or anytime they have a challenge with the Denver Sheriff's Department and need to have access to information, that they always get an answer to that call or the ask. They work directly with the Department of Safety to figure out what the access for that information is, and I would defer to the Department of Safety for that as well. But I continue to believe that the relationship that we have with that office is going to continue to grow. We want the public to know that we're here at their service, and we encourage folks to look at the dashboards that we have set up publicly. So I'll pause there, Madam Chair, to see if there are questions.
We're good.
Okay. Question 7, DSD workload. In acknowledgement of the ongoing and severe staffing crisis, other city agencies should make every effort to reduce the jail population and corresponding workload on DSD staff. I think through the entire administration of Mayor Hancock, there have been lots of efforts made to try to keep the jail population low, to keep it where it is, to keep it stabilized, and additional measures to reduce the jail population, including the newest effort, which is the aid center across the street from the downtown detention center, which affords Denver police officers and other agencies the ability to defer people from coming into the jail. So I would say, as a whole, there have been efforts to reduce the jail population and subsequently the corresponding workload on DSD staff. And I'll pause for questions.
Can you just remind us of sort of like, what are historic levels of inmates in the jail, and sort of where are we now, just to give us a little bit of a benchmark?
Yeah, today we're at about 1,700, and that is lower than we have been in the past few years. Prior to the pandemic, we were at about 2,000 people in custody. That number came down to 950 at the height of the pandemic, has slowly creeped up to about 1,700, but it's kind of plateaued at this point. And I think a lot of that has been because of those efforts to defer people from being in custody. Hopefully, some of the things that we're doing relative to programming is helping to keep recidivism low. So there are lots of things that are happening. But historically, based on the overall timeline for the number of people in custody, we're lower than we have been in prior years.
It's great. And do you feel like the new aid center will have a direct impact? Do you have ability to measure that at all? And, you know, sort of how are you feeling about that as a, you know, deterrence?
I think the aid centers data will demonstrate the number of people that they've helped, along with the number of people that have been deferred from coming to jail that have gone through the aid center. I think it is a part of the overall effort by the city to keep people out of jail. So I think those larger metrics will absolutely show that the aid center's work is helping when it comes to the work that they do. And I have to give a shout out to their director, Carlon Manuel, who is hit the ground running as well.
Thanks. And then just one further follow-up. So, you know, there's been a lot of conversation about sweeps in the city and, you know, sort of impact that has on people experiencing homelessness. You know, I know that, you know, some parks, you know, happen to do a lot of ticketing and things like that. Can you speak to sort of how many steps does it take for somebody experiencing homelessness if they're just sort of, you know, getting tickets for trespassing or, you know, being in a spot after dark or, you know, camping or whatever? You know, how many engagements with the police department does it take before they, you know, typically arrive in your custody? Or sort of what does that environment look like a little bit?
I would actually defer to Chief Thomas because that's a street function and a function of the Denver Police Department, as well as Director Saldalte. I do know the work that is being done to help the folks, the SET team, the street enforcement team is out there every day doing good work to help the people who are unhoused. And so I'm not sure specifically how many steps that it takes, but I can tell you they're out there doing great work side by side with the Denver Police Department and other city providers to help people. So hopefully they don't come into our custody.
Okay. And then maybe a different way of asking that question is, do you have a sense of how many folks in your custody of the 1,700 are folks that are experiencing homelessness in Denver or have experienced homelessness in Denver?
We don't have a solid way to track that information, mostly because when folks come into our custody, answering the question about if they're housed is one that sometimes folks refuse to answer, are not able to answer. And oftentimes folks are in our custody and may be a person experiencing who's unhoused, but that may change while they're in our custody. They may find shelter. And in fact, it's one of the things that we're working towards as a department to help folks that are in our custody to find shelter before they leave. So that's really a tough question for not just our department to answer, but jails across the country. It's a tricky question to ask and to have reliable data.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay. If there are no more questions for number one, I'll move on to number two. Do you have any updates about the first 2 months of providing tablets to inmates? The first thing that I want to tell you is the tablets have been very popular amongst the people that are in custody as well as our staff. As I walk around talking to the folks that are in our custody, they're very thankful to have them. I went specifically to the medicated assisted treatment unit last week and talked to the folks that were in there. They were watching programs on their tablets. The biggest complaint that we had was that we didn't have enough of the earbuds, the headphones that plug into the tablet. And so myself, along with the captain of logistics, worked directly with the vendor to get those shipped out to us ASAP overnight. We rolled them out as soon as we got them and made sure that folks had the ability to access those tablets. We're going to keep metrics relative to the tablets. And I can tell you, when I asked about just the call volume, because I think that's a metric that we can talk about, there has been a significant increase in the ability for people who have the tablets to contact their families, because they no longer have to wait in the pod for the 6 phones that are on the wall to call their family members. They can call them directly from the tablets. So they now have 2 options to do that. So those family connections, which we know help to reduce recidivism, to keep people in contact, those phone calls have increased significantly. And so we look forward to being able to provide some stronger and more foundational metrics to the board, perhaps on our next call when we have a little more time with the tablet rollout. But I can tell you that they have been something that has had a positive response from the people in custody. So I'll pause there for questions. Stephen.
Sheriff, that's just great news. I'm sure, you know, a lot of us, obviously, we use technology every day. That I don't want to assume that for, you know, the entire population, or certainly, you know, the population of incarcerated folks. Do you provide is there any kind of training provided to people in terms of how to use the tablets? I'm sure people are very excited about getting them, but there may be some basics that they would need to learn in terms of how to use them effectively. Is any training provided?
Not necessarily training, but we do have sort of an instruction sheet about how to access the tablet that we give to folks. A lot of it is them talking to the other people that are in custody, asking questions, because some of the folks that have been here a little longer, they can serve as sort of peer mentors to others about how to access certain things on the tablet. But they're really, especially in this day and age, something that most folks are able to utilize because they're very similar to products that you would see at home, and very nimble when it comes to accessing apps, the way you access movies, the way you access the different things that are on the device.
Yeah, I mean, they are fairly intuitive and straightforward, and people learn things through trial and error, as I do every day. But in any event, yeah, I was just curious about that. But thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think Julia, you were next, and then Nick.
Stuck my hand down so Nick could go next. Go ahead, Nick.
Okay.
Thank you. Let me take my hand down here. Good morning, and thank you for being with us, Sheriff. I guess I had a question. I have seen the rollout of the tablets kind of from the other end as a public defender. And so I'm wondering if there are any efforts being made to allow clients to contact their attorneys in a confidential way, because my understanding is that the programming is still run through Securus, and those are all recorded and then could be discoverable. So I'm wondering if there's any efforts in that direction.
There is, and in fact, the Chief Legal Counsel, Wendy Shea, has been involved in that conversation. We'll continue to try to figure out ways to do that until we have that up and running. And you're always welcome to come in and to the facility to visit your client or to have other means of communication with them as well. But we'll continue to work towards that.
Okay, thank you, Sheriff.
I do have a follow-up question. So I know the Department of Corrections for the state, had some legislation passed this year regarding free phone calls for inmates, and just wondered, that doesn't apply to you, but, might there be writing on the wall for what's to come in terms of, future legislation or anything? And, sort of just what, I'm not asking you to speculate, but like what might that mean for you in terms of programming and costs and things?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure if that legislation actually passed. I think are you sure that it did?
I'm pretty sure it did, because it has impacts on my agency to be able to administer it. But yeah, it's much more watered down, I think, than it was originally, but I'll check back into it.
Yeah, I have been familiar with this topic for a number of years. In fact, I testified before the FCC relative to the charges that are made or the cost incurred for phone calls from facilities. And what I can tell you is that the Denver Sheriff's Department has the lowest phone call rate for any facility in the entire state of Colorado purposefully. We work with our vendor, Securus, to ensure that those rates are as low as they can be based on the cost of them doing the business that they provide for us, along with the equipment, as well as some other things that they reimburse us for. So I'm not sure that there would come a time where jails would be able to provide the cost of the call for free. It's been a discussion that has been had in a number of circles for almost 10 years now. It hasn't come to fruition, but what I can tell you is we will continue to ensure that those costs are as low as possible as an agency. It's a priority for us because we understand the impact, not just to the people in custody, but also to the folks that are at home who are on the other end of that call. Many of you know that I'm the child of a formerly incarcerated person. And I recall when my dad was in custody, my mom telling us we can't take any more phone calls because we can't afford it. So we don't want families to have to choose between keeping the lights on and accepting phone calls from a loved one. So we keep those calls as low as possible. All right, I'll move on to the next question. Number 3, in the DSD's 2022 annual report, it states the DSD plans to begin contact visitation at the county jail this summer. Can you provide an update on that process? Do you have policies regarding contact visitation in place, or are they being finalized? So the contact visit room is almost complete. I was out there yesterday walking around. The contractor has the drywall in, they have the ceiling frame in, the private rooms are built. And so the last few steps of adding carpeting, paint, and the other items are almost done. We will start that process at the end of the summer. We're very excited to do so. And we do have dormant policies that were previously in place that have been a part of our department orders for a number of years. And the new policies based on our current operation are being finalized. So that's going through our process of review and the system known as Power DMS. Once the chain of command inside our agency signs off on it, as well as the city attorney's office and myself, we'll have those policies finalized. Madam Chair, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and maybe I'll regret asking this question, but can you define what contact is?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That means physical contact. So in addition to having the video visits, which we've had for a number of years, as well as the through the glass visiting that exists at the county jail, which is very limited. This is actually being able to touch and hug your loved one, to be in the presence of them face to face for that contact visit. Way back in 2005, sheriff's departments and departments of correction began to move away from contact visits because of the contraband issues that existed, as well as some other things. Sometimes there was domestic violence that happened in some of those spaces. But now that we have revisited the fact that having that physical touch is important for people and for families, especially those that are coming back home soon, we did an entire process where we explored whether or not contact visitation, in-person visitation, was in the best interest of the Denver Sheriff's Department. In fact, that was one of the questions that the previous monitor, Nick Mitchell, posed to us, and we stood up a team that included him. And I think Greg might have even attended some of those meetings to discuss that. And we came to the conclusion that it absolutely was. So we presented that idea up the chain. It was approved by City Council. We got the funding for it. COVID put us on pause, right? Because there wasn't a need for us to move forward with the construction and implementation of that at that time. But since then, we have moved back towards getting that into place. So we're excited to have that as a part of the visitation options that we provide for the people that are in custody.
Cool. And can you just sort of describe what the rooms are? Is it 3 walls with a glass so that, you know, they can be monitored, or is it, you know, lots of visitations in the same space, or, you know, sort of give us a little bit of a description.
Sure. And when you all come on the tours, would love to take you to the county jail so that you can see the space. It's actually both. So we have a very large room where multiple families can visit at the same time. It's going to be a very inviting space. We have a submission for an artist to do a mural on the wall that's in the space. That's a part of the project. It'll be carpeted with the same kind of chairs that you would see in any other public visitation space, so it doesn't look correctional in nature. But in addition to that larger room, we have private rooms where families can perhaps visit with smaller children. Julia, you're getting ready to have a baby come into your life. There are other families that have the same thing and they want to sit and hold that child in maybe a more private setting. We'll have rooms like that as well. So I believe there are 3 private rooms along with the larger space in that contact visit room.
That's great. And then do they request it and that gets scheduled, and can they request it, I assume if you have a new baby, you'd want to see that baby, on the right as regular as possible. And so how does that all work in terms of access?
That's exactly how it works. They make a request. We do a review of the person that's requesting it. It's approved, and then the family comes in for the visit at their scheduled time. And this is also something that we know works in 2023 because we have seen other facilities where this has occurred. There's a very progressive jail in San Diego, the Las Colinas Women's Detention Facility, which is one of the most progressive and well-built facilities in the nation, has a contact visit room. So we model some of what we are doing after the work that we saw there as well. All right, there are no more questions on that. I'll move on to number 4. In the DSD's 2022 annual report, it states that the DSD is planning to complete the rollout of body-worn cameras to all staff by June 2023. Is that timeline still accurate? It absolutely is. I think Liz and Greg can both attest to you that we have almost completed our body camera rollout. They are being utilized by our staff. We're working through the bugs in that rollout. And we are actually moving from the current version of a body-worn camera 2 to a body-worn camera 3, which is a device that has some more features that we're able to utilize, including a longer run time for the device. So we're very happy that we were able to bring body-worn cameras on to the Denver Sheriff's Department. I personally believe that it's one of the best inventions for law enforcement and the community across the nation. So I'll pause there and answer any questions.
I'm sorry, Terrence, go ahead. I didn't put my hand up, my bad, go ahead.
I need to change my raise hand feature because it just fades into the black background because it's a little too dark. So I'm gonna change it back to the yellow one so it's really visible, even though it's not reflective of who I am. But that's another discussion. So my question is about that. I'm on one today, I think. My question is about the activation of the body-worn camera. When you're on patrol, say out on the streets, I mean, it's really clear when you activate it, you're contacting someone, you turn the body camera on. It seems to me it has to be a little different in a jail setting because you're always, well, generally you're in a lot of contact with the inmates. So how do you determine which interactions require the activation of body-worn camera in an in-custody situation where everything seems like it's an enforcement contact or could be?
Great question, Terrence. We actually have very specific department orders that tell our staff when they are required to have them in buffering mode. And anytime that there's an anticipated use of force, they have to activate their cameras. If they're interacting with someone and that is a possibility, they have to activate them. I think there is something to say about the fact that some of the things that our deputies are doing are in the normal course of their duties. And there isn't an anticipated use of force, or there isn't likely a need to turn those cameras on. So those policies are very specific about when the need to turn those cameras on has to occur. And so we give them very specific instruction about that. It's included in the department order, and it's also being trained for when they must be activated. Stephanie.
Yeah, my question relates to what Terrence already raised, but are there issues with, because of the complication of when the cameras should be turned on in the context of the sheriff's deputy? Has there been some pushback from the deputies? Has there been sufficient training of the deputies? And are you aware of the fact that some deputies are not following the processes and procedures to turn on their cameras? I know that's a three-part question, but so be it.
There have been some challenges along the way with body worn cameras. We're working through those. One of the things that we're going to be doing in the upcoming training for our staff is sharing with them the benefits of the cameras. And this isn't unique to the Denver Sheriff's Department. This happens to law enforcement agencies across the nation when it comes to the rollout of the body worn cameras. We do have to ensure that all of our staff is compliant with the orders. There is a period of time where you want to give some grace for folks to have muscle memory and turning them on. And so we're going to continue to move forward with making sure that they're trained correctly. We have some additional training that's going to be done by the city attorney's office and our training staff here in the next couple of weeks. And we expect that everyone will be utilizing them the way that we have intended.
I mean, you make a very good point about the fact that it can also provide protection for the sheriff's deputies in terms of, unless you have, I'm stating the obvious, but I mean, you have the video evidence of exactly what happened during an incident. I mean, that's the best evidence of all, other than, people saying, well, this happened or this happened, right? I mean, it's critical that these policies and practices be enforced and that people follow them. Again, I'm stating the obvious, but it's just critical that happens.
Yeah, we agree. It's one of the reasons that I say they're, one of the best things that has happened in our field ever, because especially in a jail environment, or even perhaps at court services or other places where we already have existing aerial camera views, this brings you right into the situation to let you hear and see what that deputy or uniformed staff member was dealing with, because sometimes the picture is greater than what you just see from those other views. There are lots of different factors that contribute to the response from the deputy. And so we believe that they are sometimes career savers, and we're very happy to have them on board.
Right. And conversely, they're important to evaluate misconduct that may occur, but should not occur.
I'll tell you, we absolutely believe in accountability and know that these are going to hold our staff accountable when that's necessary as well.
Okay, thank you, Sheriff.
Any other questions on this topic? Okay, I'll move on to number 5. The county jail's inmate population has decreased by over 20% since the start of April, from 725 to 563. With the dates of April 1st to May 15th. Do you know what has caused this change? I do. We have had a number of cells at the county jail, which our maintenance team is currently working to repair, and we cannot have folks placed into those cells if they're not able to utilize all the features in those cells. So that could be mechanical, that could be something like window. If that cell is not a place where someone is absolutely safe, then we will not house them there. So that is the reason why the major at the county jail, Major Kelly Bruning, and the maintenance team is working to get those things repaired.
Can you just say where the people went?
Generally, we'll just move them to other parts of the downtown detention center. So if you look at the DDC, you'll see that the count at the DDC actually went up about the same time.
Thanks.
All right, last question. The DSD's food service contract with Airmark will be ending at the end of the month. Can you talk about the transition period, what the transition period to the new provider looks like? What systems of accountability do you have in place to avoid some of the issues in the past? I certainly can. The new provider is Trinity Food Services. The transition period is the same as you would expect for any two contractual relationships for providers to happen. There is a handoff that happens where those two vendors will work together to ensure that there's a continuity of operation. The new food service provider, Trinity, is one that only works in the correction industry. Their sole focus is jails, and they work in jails across the nation from border to border and coast to coast. In fact, they work directly with, and I believe that their parent company is Keith Corporation, who is our commissary provider. And so they're a national company that is able to facilitate the volume that the Denver Sheriff's Department has. In regard to the systems of accountability that we have in place, I'm going to go through a few things. And so please feel free to ask questions after I provide this information. First, we have nutritional requirements that are guidelines that are developed by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in conjunction with the USDA, where all meals have to meet a target caloric requirement. And the vendor has to assign by contractual obligation dietitians to address the dietary needs to ensure that all meals meet dietary requirements, to include things like vegan meals, low sodium meals, kosher meals, etc. For quality control, we have daily inspections, which are conducted by them in their kitchen or in our kitchen by their manager. And that has to happen at the beginning of every shift. They have to ensure that the food equipment is working properly, and they have to identify any potential hazards. The food director is required to forward that weekly inspection to our chain of command every single week. We also have in place something that's called HACCP. That acronym stands for a Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point Plan, and includes food safety plans to monitor biological, chemical, and physical hazards for raw material production and the like in mass food production. Internally, the oversight is through our chain of command. Major Kelly Brewing, who is the facility administrator of the county jail, previously served as an administrator of the downtown detention center, is the executive in our agency that's responsible for working directly with Trinity to oversee their work and that contract. In addition, we have a kitchen manager who's an employee of our organization that serves as a liaison. He's the food professional that we depend on. They convene regular meetings with the vendor every week to address any issues and improve overall operational efficiency. We also have scheduled and unscheduled inspections that take place by the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. They look for Denver food establishment regulation compliance, as well as they look through that HACCP plan, the Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point Plan. We also have oversight, or I should say input, from the American Correctional Association, which is a national accrediting body which comes through every 3 years to look at our food service. But in addition to that, the National Commission on Correctional Health Care sends out independent auditors to oversee our food service program as well. Lastly, we have worked very closely with Trinity so that they understand how important this is, not just to us, not just the people that are in custody, but the community as well. We know this has been a hot topic amongst the COB for a while now. That overall concern by us, the community, the people in custody, and the COB was the reason that we opened up the RFP and went back out to find a vendor that could satisfy the requirements that we had in place, which is why we pivoted to a new vendor. We look forward to bringing them on board, to having a better relationship and better service than we've had. And hopefully look forward to having much better service for the people that are in custody. Madam Chair.
Yeah, thanks. This seems like a very robust set of controls and excited to see that in place. It makes me wonder if we could have a similar set regarding healthcare, but maybe that's a topic for another meeting. I also feel like, you know, the biggest opportunity here to help ensure the vendor is providing high quality services is the ability for you to switch, right? So as we saw with Aramark, right? You put metal in the food and we'll change the vendor, right? So I think that that's a really realistic, you know, threat is the wrong word, but a realistic sort of indicator to a vendor that they need to provide good services and that you know, operate in a free market. So just really appreciate that in this and look forward to seeing how this program rolls out.
Absolutely. And thank you all for your input and continued partnership in helping us to see where we have gaps. And we are absolutely open to addressing them, just like we did in this space.
Other board member, Karen, I see your hands up.
Right. Julia, may I be permitted to ask a question about the prior question number 5? And it was regard to the I guess ongoing construction and changes that you make to the holding cells in the jail. I was wondering if there is a specific area that will be that either exists or will be created for unhoused citizens that are involved in sweeps. Now that we've got a candidate that talks about incarcerating an unhoused person that refuses to go to shelter or seek services, will there be a specific place those individuals will be housed?
Well, Karen, we currently house people in spaces based on the objective classification system that we use. So we typically don't just move someone who's in our system to a space because they're unhoused. There are folks who are unhoused that have a number of factors that go into that analysis in that classification and may need to have services provided from the mental health team, may have services that need to be provided from a medication assisted treatment program. There may be folks that don't have either of those things and can go to general population. So I would say that in the current state that we have today, them being unhoused would be something that we would not utilize, that we do not utilize for classification purposes. We deal with the issues that the person has or look at the issues that the person has and house them accordingly.
Okay.
Yeah, did that answer your question?
It did. It did.
Okay.
Other board member questions for the sheriff? I did have one which was unrelated to what we asked, and I know we're running a little bit over with you. So if you might indulge me, I know you got money to implement an ERP and move away from paper-based or a EHR, paper-based medical records. So can you just talk to us a little bit about where that is in the process?
Yeah, we're currently reviewing the requirements for the EMR. We're very happy that that was approved for moving forward, something that we have wanted and needed for quite some time. So we are working with the city's technology committee, as well as the oversight of the technology office led by Dave Ettinger, as well as Denver Health, to figure out what those RFP requirements are going to be. So we have staff in each of those areas specifically dedicated to onboarding the EMR in the right way. And I'm sorry, the acronym that I just used is for electronic medical records. So currently, what the Denver Sheriff's Department has is a paper chart for every single person that's in custody. The EMR is going to be very helpful because then it will be not just an electronic record, but also would allow Denver Health and perhaps other entities to access those records electronically to move them over once that person is out of custody. And hopefully we'll be able to access them from other providers when someone comes into our custody, so we know in real time the services that that person has been provided when they come into our system.
Thanks. And then can you just speak to like general timeline? Do you hope to have this implemented by 24, 25? How long do you think that's going to take?
Hopefully 24. I know that by the end of this year, we're looking to onboard some of the folks that will be directly responsible for putting this into place. So we're definitely hoping 24. I hope it doesn't go into 2025.
Okay, thank you. Any last questions from board members? All right, thank you, Sheriff Diggins, a very robust and wide-reaching discussion today. Thank you from hugs to food, and that's probably what your job is like every day. So thank you. And with that, we'll turn it over to the monitor's office. Do you have any items you'd like to discuss in the public forum today? Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you all, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anything.
Okay. Do you have anything worthy of discussion in an executive session?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. May I have a motion to transition to executive session?
So moved.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll see you over there. Thanks.